The New York Giants visit the New York Jets for a joint practice. We're going to have a preview of that, including which matchups we'll be watching, plus a whole lot more on today's Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Train, a credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find our written work over on New York Giants on SI.com. And as always, a special welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and to everybody else in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. It is appreciated. And if you're watching us here on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the channel. Don't forget, if you do subscribe, click the little bell so that you are notified every time I post a new video. And if you wouldn't mind, also like the video. It all helps in the long run, and it is appreciated. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, the New York Giants will visit the New York Jets in Florham Park, New Jersey for a joint practice. And I'm going to run down some matchups that I'm particularly interested in watching. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about the plan for that in just a minute. But obviously, the way these joint practices work, you've got offense versus defense on one side, and then the other team's offense and defense on the other side of the field. So it's kind of hard to watch both at the same time, but not to worry because I got you covered, and I'll talk about that in just a bit. And then in segment 2, is there a change potentially brewing at wide receiver? I'm going to explain what I mean about that coming up in segment 2, but just something to kind of keep an eye on. Then in segment 3, we will close out the show with a look at some bubble boys, guys who have an opportunity to basically make a statement in this preseason finale that's coming up on Saturday. So that is our agenda for today. Again, welcome on into everybody. You guys are the best. I appreciate you. All right, let's get into the Giants and Jets joint practice. Now, depending on what time you're watching this video, the Giants and Jets are scheduled to have their joint practice at the Jets facility in Florham Park, New Jersey. Practice runs from 1 to, I think it's 1 to 1:30 to 3:30. So it's going to be a little later than usual, which means, tomorrow's show will be a little later, but, we'll worry about that when we get to it. And the way it works is you have the Giants offense versus the Jet defense on one field, and then you'll have the Jet defense versus the Giants offense on another. So as part of the coverage tomorrow, I'm going to have Brandon Olson with me. Brandon Olson writes for me over on New York Giants on SI, and I'm going to see if maybe I can get him on the program at some point. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow, but hopefully I can get him on for, even if we get him on for Thursday or something like that. But we'll both be watching. We'll take notes. We'll swap notes, and we'll, of course, have a report over on New York Giants on SI. But I'll, of course, have some observations and takeaways for you on the podcast for tomorrow. Okay, so that said, what are some of the matchups that I'm going to be looking for? All right, depending on what side of the field I end up working on, and who knows, I might even, switch with Brandon midway through. But here's a look at some of the matchups that I think are going to be worth watching. And I think you got to start off with Sauce Gardner, the Jets cornerback, versus Malik Nabers. That's going to probably be the marquee matchup, the one that I think a lot of people are going to be interested in, because Malik Nabers has been just so good. Doesn't matter who the cornerback has been. And he's gone up against some good cornerbacks, in the preseason. Sauce Gardner is probably like top 5, I think, at this point. So watching Nabers go against Sauce Gardner and just seeing who wins those battles more often than not, that should be a fun matchup to watch. All right. The next one that I think is going to be a fun one to watch. Bobby Okereke, the Giants inside linebacker, versus Aaron Rodgers and Jets running back Breece Hall. All right, Bobby Okereke, he is the quarterback of that Giants defense. He's the guy who doesn't come off the field. So, a very cerebral type of player going up against Rodgers, who is say what you want about him, but he's a smart quarterback, a crafty quarterback. So just watching those two kind of engage in that chess match should be a lot of fun. And then watching Okereke and that Giants run defense try to slow down Breece Hall, who I think is the Jets' best runner. That should be a lot of fun to watch as well. So I'm curious to see how that plays out, because the Giants' run defense last week wasn't horrible. I think it was more exposed at the edges than it was up the gut. So I want to see how the Giants kind of, tighten things up against the Jets in this joint practice. Excuse me. All right. The next matchup, Jets receiver Garrett Wilson versus Giants cornerback Deonte Banks. All right. So just as the Sauce Gardner-Malik Neighbors matchup should be fun to watch, now you've got the opposite. You've got Wilson versus Banks. I think Wilson is the Jets' number one receiver. Banks, of course, the Giants' number one cornerback. Who's going to win that one? All right. Two young players. We'll see who comes out on top. Dexter Lawrence against Jets center Joe Tippmann. All right, sexy Dexy, good luck trying to move him out of the way. Good luck trying to slow him down. That man is a load to handle. And Tippmann, he's going to have Dexter lined up over him on the, over his nose. So that's going to be interesting to see if Dexter can help push that pocket and the Giants, can penetrate the Jets' offensive backfield, get some pressure on Aaron Rodgers or, whatever quarterback they decide to put out there. Similarly, you have John Michael Schmitz versus Quinnen Williams, excuse me. Now, John Michael Schmitz, obviously, he's still working his way back from the shoulder issue that kept him out of practice for about 10 days or so, but he's been making progress, getting better. And Quinnen Williams, when you talk about the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL, you've got to put Quinnen Williams in the discussion, along with Dexter Lawrence, of course. So that's going to be a fun matchup. And then I think the other one that's going to be interesting is going to be Tyron Smith, the Jets left tackle, against Kayvon Thibodeaux. Now, I would guess that the Giants are probably going to flip Thibodeaux and Brian Burns and just, kind of match them up differently. But Thibodeaux generally, I think, plays against the left tackle, if I'm not mistaken. So I want to see how they do with that pass rush, because Tyron Smith, even though he's towards the back nine of his career, is still a very good blindside protector. So we'll see how that one plays out. All right. So that's a list of, some of the marquee matchups as I see it in these joint practices. It's going to be a physical practice. It is a padded practice. And what I'm curious to also see is how the quality of the reps go, because I think that's going to go a long way towards determining who plays on Saturday in the actual game and how much they play. And I would expect, if I had to take a guess, and Brian Daboll hasn't, given away his plans, he never does. But if I had to take a guess, I would say expect the Giants starters for maybe a quarter of a play, of the game rather. Depending on how many reps they get in this joint practice, I think you'll probably see the Giants starters for a quarter. I'd be very surprised if they sit everybody down. Look, because you sit everybody down, and now you've got 2 weeks before opening day. So I'm not. This isn't to say that, it'll give them a chance to get rusty or anything like that. But you go back to last year, and you remember how the Giants were so slow coming out of the gate against Dallas because their starters sat in the preseason finale. They only had the one series the week before in preseason game number 2. I don't think Brian Daboll will make that mistake again. I hope he doesn't. We'll see if, again, how they deploy everybody. But that would be my best guess. I know a lot of you have asked me about that. So that would be my best guess regarding what the Giants are going to do. All right, coming up next, is there a change in the air on defense and offense at two different positions? We have receiver, we have safety. I'm going to talk about that based on what went down in Tuesday's practice. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans. So, when I'm not covering the team, I enjoy getting the chance to go to live events, whether they're concerts, plays, or other sporting events. And with the Game Time app, I never have to worry about being shut out of any event that I want to attend. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. Game Time Picks filter out the fluff to show you only the most incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. With Game Time, there are no hidden fees. You'll know exactly what you're paying for before you check out. You'll get clear images of your seat views, and you'll also get event cancellation protection. And if you find tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and get the tickets to the events that you want. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. It is appreciated. And in this segment, it's interesting. You go through training camp and you kind of watch how some of the battles unfold. And after a while, you kind of get a sense of, okay, who's locked in on starting jobs, who's locked in on key positions, and so on and so forth. And to me, I think there's been a little bit of a shift on both the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball in two different areas. And I want to talk about them in this segment. The first one is at safety. Now, Jason Pinnock is locked in as one of the starting safeties. And, he's done nothing to not warrant, having a starting job again. But at the beginning of camp, and this, could have been because Tyler Nubin was injured and, was working his way back. But you kind of thought that Dane Belton had the inside track on the other starting safety job, the job that was previously held by Xavier McKinney. And at one point, remember Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, said that the job was Belton's to lose. Well, you know what? Tyler Nubin's been playing really, really well to where he is now getting more reps with the first team defense. And, look, it's not necessarily going to be a demotion for Belton if he doesn't get the starting job. And here's why. The Giants like to use three safeties in this defense, whether it's Belton and Pinnock and Isaiah Simmons, whether it's going to be Nubin and Pinnock and Simmons. I mean, however they're going to run it. So I could see a scenario, especially after watching how Isaiah Simmons struggled against the smaller slot receivers. Maybe we start to see more of Dane Belton in that role rather than Simmons. So just something to keep an eye on there. I'm going to see if I can hone in and watch and see exactly how the Giants play it. Now, there's no rhyme or reason in the preseason. There's no game planning. But I think we can all agree that Isaiah Simmons against the smaller slot receivers, just not really a good match. So I think that's how they're going to look to solve it. Maybe move Dane Belton into the slot. And, you've got your starting safeties would be then Nubin and Jason Pinnock. So something to keep an eye on within the Giants defense. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, this is kind of a subtle change. And I don't even know if this change is like set in stone, but it's something that doesn't really surprise me. So going into the summer, everybody kind of figured that the Giants' top three receivers in order would be Malik Neighbors, Malik Neighbors, Jalen Hyatt, and Wan'Dale Robinson, with Darius Slayton being the fourth guy. You know what? Slayton's had a pretty good camp. He's not getting a lot of kudos for it, but he's had a pretty good camp. He's had a good preseason, maybe a little bit better than Jalen Hyatt. And lo and behold, during Tuesday's practice, guess who was getting first team reps? That's right. It was Darius Slayton, the guy who was able to get open for the big 44-yard gain in the preseason game against the Texans. The guy who Daniel Jones seems to be most comfortable with because he's been throwing to him since they both came into the league in 2019. So, I find it interesting because so many, you know, quote unquote analysts out there who write for these national um, sites, they're like, oh, the Giants got to trade Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton's on the trading block. No, I don't think so. I really don't. Slayton has value, folks, and he's not a bad receiver. And I can't understand, and granted, there was a time when I thought, okay, you might as well see if you can get something for him because he's in the last year of his contract and the chances of them re-signing him probably slim to none. But you know what? You don't give away talent so readily. And again, I would say at this point, Slayton's had a little bit better of a camp than Hyatt. Now, that doesn't mean that Hyatt is, throw him on the scrap heap because he's no good anymore or anything like that. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I just feel like it's not a slam dunk that Hyatt is going to be in the top 3 there in terms of rep distribution. Now, they're all different receivers, obviously. Neighbors is in a league of his own. Wandale is your human joystick, if you will. And then, Slayton is your outside track guy, if you will, which Hyatt can be. And I think, Hyatt, again, not a bad receiver. He's still learning the intricacies of the game. I think he's going to be fine as he continues to learn. And I could see at some point maybe he even gets, he overtakes Slayton for reps. But I would not be surprised if once the season opens, those are your top 3. And Hyatt just gets worked in, in the beginning when there's an opportunity or a certain package. So just something to keep an eye on there with regards to the passing game. Because look, the Giants want to get vertical. And one of the knocks against Jalen Hyatt is when it comes to contested catches, it just hasn't been his forte yet. So if Darius Slayton shows that he's a little bit more physical and a little bit more willing to mix it up to get those contested catches, he's probably going to get, the nod over Jalen Hyatt in certain situations. Doesn't mean Hyatt goes to the bench, but I'm just saying in certain situations and certain play calls. So just something to keep an eye on as we get ready, as we cruise into this final preseason game coming up against the Jets. All right, now coming up next, we're going to look at some bubble boys, some guys who have a chance to salvage a roster spot, and we'll look at their competition and kind of how things stack up. I have just a few that I want to talk about. There's probably more than what's on my list, but we'll talk about just a few of these right after this. Hey, Giant fans, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And again, thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope you are having a great week. And for most of you who are watching this show, it's probably Wednesday, so happy hump day to everybody. And don't forget to tune in. We will have a wrap up after the Giant Jet joint practice. Now, again, the day is going to run a little bit later than usual. So I will try and get a podcast out to you before I go to bed. I'll probably be up late and I'll probably get that out to you a little later in the evening just because of, the logistics involved and everything like that. But I will get you a podcast. Of course, we'll also have coverage over on New York Giants on SI. And don't forget to follow me on X, the site formerly known as Twitter, because I will send out tweets and videos. And actually, videos will go on my Instagram account at Patty Traina, PattiTraina. And, I'll just try and bring you as much as I can according to the rules that are set forth by the Jets PR staff. Now we're kind of in the time of year where they don't want us videotaping every single thing that's out there. So we just have to follow the rules that they tell us. But anyway, in this segment, we're going to talk about a few bubble boys. All right. The Giants, of course, have roster decisions to make. A lot of the decisions pretty much set. I think we can safely assume, certain guys are going to make the roster, but there are some guys at the bottom of the depth charts at different positions where, it'll be interesting to see what happens with them. So I just made a short list, quite honestly. And here's what I have. So I'm going to start off with defensive lineman DJ Davidson. Now, when I initially did my 53-man roster projection, my latest one, I didn't have Davidson making the roster. I don't think Davidson has had that great of a camp. I didn't think he played that well against the Texans. And, keep in mind, when I made that roster projection, the Giants hadn't traded Jordan Phillips. Ryder Anderson hadn't been waived injured. So now, with some of that depth dwindling down a little bit, DJ Davidson has a good chance with a strong showing this week against the Jets, both in the joint practice and in the game, of maybe salvaging a roster spot. If he doesn't salvage it, I think he's practice squad, but he's got a chance here. All right. So he's number one on my list. Another guy who I think was maybe on the bubble and has now a good chance of maybe sticking is Carter Coughlin. Now, last year, Carter Coughlin was the Giants' special teams leading tackler. I don't remember how many he had, but I know he led the Giants' special teams in tackles. So at inside linebacker, Deontay Johnson is injured. Matthew Adams is injured. Micah McFadden is injured. Now, McFadden, I think, is going to be okay. I don't know if he'll be ready for week 1, but he's not going on IR and he's not getting waived. Johnson and Adams will have to see. Adams is really, a good special teamer. But I'll tell you, as far as Coughlin's competition goes, it's the rookie, Darius Mawaso. He has come on strong of late. All right. And I think it could come down to Mawaso versus Carter Coughlin for maybe that last spot at inside linebacker. All right. So you figure it's going to be McFadden, Okereke, I think Isaiah Simmons, who I count as an inside linebacker. I know he's listed as a safety, but I count him as an inside linebacker. I don't think Darian Beavers is going to make the cut. I'd be kind of surprised if that happens. But Mawaso would be the guy to watch. And again, I think it comes down to him or Carter Coughlin. And then the other one that I'm really not sure how this is going to play out, but I'm going to think outside the box here a little. The new fullback that the Giants signed last week, Jacob Johnson, all right, who, had a decent enough game. He didn't look too bad considering that, he came in and got the playbook literally like, I think the night before he had to go out on the field. So he's kind of flying by the seat of his pants. But here's an interesting scenario that I want to put out there. And I've often thought about this, and it's interesting because I think somebody on the YouTube channel asked me about this, and it's something that I had raised actually back in the spring during the rookie minicamp. And that is, could the Giants turn to Elijah Chapman, that, defensive tackle, that young defensive tackle who is making this team, folks? I mean, this kid is something else. He's making this team. But Chapman also has some fullback experience. Not a whole lot, but he has some. And, you look at the Giants running game, and they really don't have a big bruiser type that they can put out there on the field, particularly in short yardage situations, goal line situations. So if you're making out your 53-man roster, do you say, okay, we'll devote a spot to, Jacob Johnson and let him be the lead blocker on those short yardage and goal line situations? Johnson, of course, being a fullback / tight end. Or do you say, okay, you know what? We're going to lean heavily on our receiver core, so we really don't need to carry 4 tight ends. The 4 tight ends would have projected to be Bellinger, Theo Johnson, Chris Manhertz. I think will make it as the blocking tight end, and then Jacob Johnson would have been the 4th guy. So instead of doing that, why not have Chapman be your blocker? All right. Let him be your pseudo fullback, if you will. It saves a roster spot. Okay. So now you can carry 3 running backs, you could carry 3 tight ends, and you could vote another spot, maybe that 4th spot that you would have devoted to the running backs or to the tight end group. You could devote it elsewhere where maybe you're a little thin due to injuries. So that's an intriguing thing. I want to see how that kind of plays out. I mean, Chapman's not on the bubble. I want to make that clear. I don't think he is on the bubble. I think Johnson could be on the bubble. And that's, I don't think he's a slam dunk. So I'm going to say, that's a competition to keep an eye on. And I just want to see if they utilize Chapman as a potential lead blocker. I think he would be good at it. Doesn't have a lot of experience again, but I don't know if y'all remember a few years ago, Nikita Whitlock used to do that. He was the smallest type of defensive lineman, but he was also a fullback. He was the beef that they needed when they had short yardage and goal line situations. Chapman's a much better player than I recall Nikita Whitlock being. So just something to keep an eye on as the Giants put the roster together. And it's going to be interesting for sure. And speaking of the roster, we are going to do a roster projection show. Now, I might have Coach Gene on it, Coach Gene Clemens. I might see if Nick Filato can come on. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do the format, because if you have too many guys on at once, it could be a little muddied. But I'll figure out something, and we will do some kind of roster projection show. We'll probably do that. I would say we'll look to do that on Sunday. The Giant Jet game is going to be Saturday night. And I don't know if I'm going to spend a whole lot of time reviewing the Giant Jet game, but certainly the roster projection, that's going to be a hot topic. That should be a lot of fun. So that's kind of what I have in mind, but I just got to finalize the details. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you for tuning in and making us part of your day. We will be back tomorrow. Again, it'll be a little later than usual, but we will be back tomorrow with a recap of the Giants-Jets joint practice. We will see you then.